the Common Era, the Sufi orders emerged. One order that crystallized in the 8th century of the Hijra, the 14th century of the Common Era, was the Naqshbandi order. The order gained its name from Bahauddin Naqshband, Qaddasallahu sirrahu, its founder, who was from Bukhara. After having spent a number of years as a disciple of several masters, Bahauddin developed the teachings and practices of the lineage of sheikhs called the Khwaja and began teaching others. One of his chief practices, for which the Naqshbandi order came to be well known, was the practice of the silent remembrance of God in the heart. After having trained a number of disciples and brought them to a degree of mastery, Bahauddin passed away in the year 791 of the Hijra, 1389 of the Common Era. Among his chief disciples was Khwaja Muhammad Parsa. Parsa was so highly regarded by Bahauddin that he said of him, "The purpose for my coming into being was his existence." Parsa was a scholar of the religious sciences and wrote a number of works on Sufism. Although he thought highly of the works of Ibn Arabi, his own works do not exhibit much direct influence from the Shaykh al-Akbar. He died in Medina shortly after performing the rites of his second Hajj in the year 822, 1419 of the Common Era. One of Parsa's most important works is the book Qudsiya. The Qudsiya, a 70-page book to which the remainder of my talk is related, refers to the Kalimat al-Qudsiya, which means the sacred sayings. These, of course, are the words of Bahauddin Naqshband, Qaddasallahu sirrahu. Surprisingly, however, the actual words of Bahauddin are few in the Qudsiya. The work largely consists of Parsa's discussion and amplification of excerpts from the talks of Bahauddin. As a last word before plunging into the discussion of the quality of the hadith of the Qudsiya, I should note that although Parsa was himself a scholar of the religious sciences, an alim, on at least one occasion he was denounced by the ruler of Bukhara. He was denounced to the ruler of Bukhara by the hadith scholars of that city. Although it is certainly possible that the reason for his denunciation was his use of fabricated hadith, the actual cause is unclear. Now I'll examine 6 of the 12 hadith that Parsa cites in the course of his book. When I give you the opinions of hadith scholars, I will present them to you in historical order. This way you'll get a sense that the study of hadith is a tradition of scholars. In the text of the Qudsiya we find the hadith, "Ijma'u wadu'akum, jama'allahu shamlakum." Gather your water for wudu, and God will unite your scattered state of affairs. The earliest hadith collection in which this is found is Qudsiya, who died in the year 454, 1062 of the Common Era. He lists this hadith with its complete isnad on the authority of Abu Huraira. Bayhaqi, who died in 454, writing about the same time as Qudsiya, noted that the isnad had some unknown transmitters. In addition, Bayhaqi stated that a hadith that was similar had been narrated with another isnad, but that was weak. Al-Ghazali, who died in the year 505, includes it in his Ihya. In addition, Daylami, a contemporary of Al-Ghazali, includes it in his Firdaus. Iraqi, who died in 806, the commentator on the hadith of the Ihya, was aware of the hadith in Qudsiya's collection and stated that there was nothing wrong with its isnad. On the other hand, he knew of another isnad which was weak. Suyuti, in his Jami al-Kabir, lists a hadith that is nearly identical, but it too, he said, was weak. In summary, although a number of hadith scholars regarded this hadith as weak, the opinion was by no means unanimous, with Iraqi even asserting its acceptability. This hadith, "Ijma'u wadu'akum, jama'allahu shamlakum," gather your water for wudu, and God will unite your scattered state of affairs, functions in the Qudsiya as an introduction to a chapter on dhikr, the remembrance of God. Parsa asserts that it points to the fact that one should combine an inner wudu with the outer wudu so that one can gain steadfastness. The key to gaining inner steadfastness is negating all of one's spiritual and physical attachments through the remembrance of La ilaha illallah. Thus Parsa links the concept of an inner wudu with the remembrance of God, which cleanses the heart. And furthermore, he sees the hadith as pointing to the necessity of inwardly cleansing the heart with remembrance when one performs one's outer ablution. The second hadith I will examine is as follows. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أفضل ذكر لا إله إلا الله وأفضل الدعاء الحمد لله. The best method of remembering God is La ilaha illallah, and the best supplication is Alhamdulillah. Ibn Majah, who died in 273, includes it in his Sunan, as did Tirmidhi, who died in 297. Tirmidhi states, however, that the hadith is Hasan Qareeb. Nevertheless, as Dr. Azami points out, although Hasan hadith are not of the highest quality, they can nevertheless be relied upon. Ibn Hibban included this hadith in his collection of sound hadith. Al-Hakim included it in his book Al-Mustadrak, the supplement to the two sound collections. Ghazali, who died in 505, included it in the Ihya. And finally, Ajluni, who dies in 1162, 1748 of the Common Era, confirms the verdicts of earlier scholars that this indeed is a sound hadith. As one might expect, the hadith, Afdalu dhikr, la ilaha illallah, wa afdalu du'a, alhamdulillah. The best method of remembering God is La ilaha illallah, and the best supplication is Alhamdulillah. As you might expect, in the Qudsiya, this frames a discussion of dhikr. Since Parsa's discussion is extraordinarily clear, I'll simply translate verbatim what he says at this point. I'll quote, "The form of this dhikr is comprised of negation, which is La ilaha, and affirmation, which is illallah. In truth, the path to God is traveled by means of this dhikr. Travelers, however, become veiled as a result of forgetfulness. Essentially, the origin of veiling is enjoyment of existent forms in the heart. In this enjoyment, God is negated, and other than God is affirmed. But in accordance with the principle of a cure is through a thing's opposite, by means of La ilaha illallah, other than God is negated, and God is affirmed. Liberation from subtle shirk only comes about through constancy and persistent attunement to La ilaha illallah. So when remembering the negation, La ilaha illallah, continues Parsa, the one who is remembering must view all temporal things as transitory, without desiring them. While contemplating the meaning of the dhikr, one must negate all other thoughts. When affirming illallah, one must witness the pre-temporal being of God as subsistent, as one's goal, the object of one's search, and one's beloved. By the negation La ilaha illallah, one must nullify whatever bonds exist in one's heart. And by the affirmation illallah, the love of God takes the place of one's old loves. Gradually, the heart becomes freed of all desires. The existence of the rememberer becomes annihilated in the light of remembrance, and the attachments of human nature drop away. The third hadith that I will treat is Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Inna Allah azza wa jal ittakhadha Ibrahima khalilan wa Musa najiyan wa ittakhadhani habiban ثم قال الله وعزتي لأؤثرن حبيبي وعزتي لأؤثرن حبيبي على خليلي ونجي. The Prophet said, God chose Abraham as a dear friend and Moses as a confidant, and he chose me as a loved one. Then God said,